Grand evening, my loved ones. This is your Empress Goddess, Georgia Peach. I hope all is well with the loved ones tonight. As for me, I'm still here, doing well. Little tired. I said to myself, I said I had told myself earlier when I got off that last live, I said, I'm not gonna do no more lives until I'm gonna take me a couple of days off. But I just can't do it. That's a Capricorn in me. But we're gonna get in here with my guy CG Dahlin. Hold on, man, I tell you, it don't never fail. We're gonna get in here with my guy CG Dahlin. Spiritual Study Session 3. Gnosticism, History, Cosmology, and Modern Resurgence.
Welcome to Session 3. This week is on Gnosticism. This topic bleeds into several other topics that we'll likely be covering throughout the course. Ancient Gnosticism is not necessarily one belief. It is an assortment of beliefs that all fall under one type of blanket term. Gnosis is Greek for knowledge, and Gnostics would be those who know, in the same way as we would use the word pagan, whereas pagan just would mean people, the people's religion. When it comes to Gnosticism, it's very tied to Hermeticism. It's very tied to Judaism. Christianity especially is a very close resemblance to it. And we also see different aspects of paganism included too, which we'll get to. Two other terms that go very hand in hand with Gnosticism is Manichaeanism and Valentinian Gnosticism, which is a different type of branch. As far as we could understand it, Gnostic before this century was basically was only known to us as a heretical religion. We would only really know about it based off of commentary of old church fathers that would quite understandably speak very ill of them. And only by grace of what is referred to as the Nag Hammadi Library did scholars or anybody really learn anything more about it. This library was found in 1945, which it's not much of a library it is now, but what it was 13 leather-bound papyrus codices. They were buried in a jar. Hold on one moment. They were buried in a jar in Egypt and were discovered and subsequently passed through the black market in several hands. These were the Gnostic treatises, which would also be belonging to what is referred to as the Corpus Hermeticum. So we could find both Gnostic literature and even other things like an alteration and a different translation of the Plato's Republic. So this is what is referred to as the Nag Hammadi Library. So in regards to Gnosticism, we find...
Hello, how you doing, love?
Please.
Thank you for dropping in.
We find some specific texts pertinent to understanding this actual religion, as they call it. The Apocryphon of John is one that we're going to be focusing on a lot. Another called On the Origin of the World, the Apocalypse of Adam, and another being Genesis and Gnosis, which there are a few more that I'm not mentioning. Other ones that are not as deep knit, but are kind of related to Gnosticism would be different texts. One of them called the Gospel of Truth, the Treatise of Resurrection, the second treatise of the great Seth, and Seth is going to be a very important figure here, and the Testimony of Truth. Now, other works are somewhat related, being that there aren't canon Christianity. So one of the biggest ones is the Gospel of Thomas. This one was discovered in the same jar, the same seal jar that I've been mentioning. So just as a little bit of a flavor of what this would sound like, this is a quote from there. The disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end will be." And Jesus said, "Have you already discovered the beginning, that you are now asking about the end? For where the beginning is, there the end will be too. Blessed is he who will stand at the beginning, and he will know the end and not taste death." So this isn't a necessarily heretical text. This would be one of the closest ones to being accepted in Greater Canon, but that's a whole nother discussion. There's one more add-on that's going to help me explain Gnosticism, and that is what was found later. Mind you, they found the jar in 1945, but in Geneva in 1983, on the gray markets, as it's referred, they found the Gospel of Judas. And this would most notably be more heretical because, as classic Christianity understands, Judas is the ultimate traitor. But this text actually makes Judas the secret hero of the story. I'll give you a little quote before I go on any further. When Jesus is introduced, he asks if any of them know who he is, and Judas says, "I know who you are and where you come from. You are from the immortal realm of Barbelo," which that's an important term, and we'll come back to that, Barbelo. "And I am not worthy to utter the name of the one who has sent you." As another context, there's this great discussion of what the priests have done with religion, you know, how they've run amok with it for money, for pleasure, for these things. And in reaction to this, Jesus says, "Those you have seen receiving the offerings at the altar, that is who you are. That is the God you serve, and you are the 12 men you have seen." So right here, it's distinguishing that they are serving that God and not another. So here's the kind of beginning of where we can start to dissect where what Gnostics believe. In this case, it was seemingly that Judas knew who Jesus was and was willing to make the sacrifice of being made into the traitor in order to help him along, which at the end of this, I'll talk a little bit more about. But before we dive into the cosmology of Gnosticism, I'm just going to give some more context as to the history. So like I said, there were different types of Gnostics. They're all under one umbrella term. And the one that still has some recognition is the Cathars. And the Cathars it comes from a Greek term, katharos, which means unpolluted or pure. They were essentially Gnostic, but they were a specific type. They believed in two gods. One was malevolent, always had a hard time with that word, evil, and one was good. And one was in charge of all material things, and the other was in charge of the invisible. And so the atrocities that the God did in the Old Testament would have been at the hand of this evil God or the material God, whereas the Cathars only worshipped the benevolent God and the invisible God, which we'll explain that some more later as well. So
oh boy,
the Cathars were definitely the most
the
hunted. They were historically all killed in their encampments.
I had said when I came off my last live, I wasn't gonna. I said to myself, I'm gonna take me a break. And right after I said that, I still ended up coming back and recording 2 more videos. And then after I did that, I said, well, I need to take me a break. I'm just tired. And I still was restless as hell. That's what I had. I need to do. I need to present one of my boys' spiritual studies. So I said, well, let me go on and hook that up real quick and go on and knock that out. I said it won't be but an hour. I said, but they ain't got to worry about me doing too much talking in there because I am wore out, man. I'm telling you. I've been doing 2, 3, 4 hour lives. I've been doing 2 or 3 of them a day. So that shit kind of getting next to me now.
They believed such crazy things as that everybody should be capable of reading the Bible.
I'm just telling you, probably hear them
the Catholic Church did not agree with, and that the Catholics went so far as to say that other people shouldn't even put their hands on a Bible.
That's what you hear. You
and
hear that,
so the Cathars were much more secular in this way, but they were all eventually, through a series of time, eventually were completely done away with through torture. Anybody who worked with them or helped them was also a heretic, and those that didn't speak against them were also heretics. An interesting point here that we want to establish is that the Cathars and Gnostics believe that there are 3 different types of people. There are terrestrial people, which are the hyletics, that are ruled by the body. Then there are the psychic people, and they are ruled by the soul and the spiritual. They call them pneumatic.
You hear what I'm talking, don't you?
And then there are those purely ruled by the spirit, and those would be true Gnostics. So at this point, that's kind of a spread of the historical context. You have something that's so similar to Christianity that it's taking its source material and that it's contradicting what would become mainstream.
My voice back gone. Let me see what I was going to say. Oh yeah, I've been over there on trying to spruce up my little channel page and everything. Trying to how you lay them out with your different playlists and all that. Because I got that tube, buddy. I've had it, but I really haven't been using it. So I say, yesterday I was just messing around with it today and stuff. So I'm trying to get all that, get my channel all organized, get it looking right. I done picked up me about maybe 10 subscribers, the last couple of days. So that's better than nothing. And I thank God for that. So I got to get that. Being, doing what I've been doing is, being vigilant has really, starting to pay off for me. So I need need to slack up a little bit. But I ain't gonna be doing no 2 and 3, 4 hour lives every day, 2 or 3 times a day. I probably might come on. I might do 2 of them, but it ain't gonna be no 2 and 3 and 4, 5 hours. I know that.
Christianity. So I'm going to lay out the cosmogony that the Gnostics believe, and we only get this again thanks to the fact that we discovered these books that were hidden. These books were hidden when time was becoming short for them. So this was an attempt to literally bury the truth as they were to see it.
I was about to give up one time.
So the cosmogony is going to get pretty deep.
They just updated that.
It's taking inspiration from everything. So mind you, instead of taking the doctrine of Jesus and Christianity and making it its own thing, this is more of the idea of using paganism, of using Judaism, of using certain aspects of Hindu, and the new found Christianity. and having it all be mixed into this greater fabric of truth instead of just choosing one side. And we can look at it like that, or we could say that this is a religion that is the core of these different religions. So we're going to start from literally the beginning. And this is what the Gnostics refer to as the pleroma. This is a realm of light, as they refer to it as.
Yeah,
so
you're right. I do.
Just like in the Kabbalah, it starts with this parent of the entirety. This is a mother, father aspect. This allness began to think after a long duration of time, began to think, and it had only itself to contemplate. And this contemplation is
avatar?
What personified an entity called the Barbelo. And the Barbelo is the image of the parent of forethought or of thinking. So the God or the mother father aspect, the entirety, made an image of itself. This is really analogous to the Kabbalah.
That's our
this is
card
what they call
in tarot,
in the Kabbalah.
The devil.
God making an image of itself in order to perceive itself. So once the parent deity began thinking and contemplating, it also started to differentiate different intangible aspects of itself, different concepts. Each of these different concepts were called aeons, which is a term which means like eternal. So it started to create different aeons, different eternities, incredibly long spans of time, and being in their own rights. So the Barbelo is what led to the first aeons. The aeons would be named things like, or have embodiments of things like prognosis, incorruptibility, eternal life, and truth. So these are high value statements, the highest of value statements. The next beings to manifest were requested to the parent entity by the Barbelo. So it was requested by the image of the entirety. And this is only going to make more and more sense.
It has updated because remember I just told you that.
And it conceived a few more.
You remember I was just telling you that I've been on the computer yesterday and stuff, trying to organize my channel. And when I tried to change my banner and stuff a while ago, it wouldn't switch over. Well, it accepted it, but it wouldn't ever, like, how I automatically changed the banner in the picture, it wouldn't do it. So I just restarted my phone. Like I said, now everything came up. When I went on this, they got it all organized and looked all nice and neat and everything. Looked real professional there. Because at the top now, I got, my live video that I'm doing. And then when you go on down, I got my little shorts and stuff. And then it got my uploads. Then they scroll down there. Then you got popular uploads. And created playlists and all that. So now look all nice and professional now. Okay. With little subscriptions. Okay, you go, girl. Oh yeah, look good now. I got to give myself a pat on the back. Another entity to embody it so that it could be perceived by what is to come. And this is what the third aspect, which is called Christos. So this is what the Gnostics refer to as Christ, or the anointed one, or the self-originating one. And it was born of itself. Do that.
So this is the intermediary. So there we have the Trinity. We have the thing.
Yeah,
we have the image of the thing.
Stop one
and
of my
then we have the kind of
talk
distillation,
about,
which is the Christos.
Somebody content. And it was
so
audio.
This is the point of veneration to the Gnostics.
I just brought the audio
in
book
this realm of
and
things,
downloaded it
purely
yesterday, and I said
spiritual
on
realm
the
of
North
things.
Nodes and stuff.
And this is
I said, what I gonna
in
say
their
to start
mind,
on
the
that this morning.
ultimate divinity that the
It's an
human
11-hour
mind can
book.
comprehend.
No, it's more
And
than
just
about
like
20
the
hours.
Jews,
No, it's 11
they
hours.
believe
So I said I
that
was
the
gonna do. I said,
human
well, I'm gonna start
mind
with Scorpio
cannot
North Node,
comprehend
since I'm a Scorpio
the
North
greater
Node.
God. And just like the early
I got
Greeks
almost through the Scorpio North Node,
would
and I know that
believe
shit don't have
in
no
a
terminator
greater
name
God,
live
but they
feed. I said,
felt
what
that
kind of
there
shit this
was
is? I'm
no
up here
right
trying
to
to clean up
speak
in the
on it,
house,
that they could only
and
speak
I'm
of the
wondering why I ain't hearing
pantheon.
them
So we
because I
can
have my
see how
phone in
all
my
these
pocket.
things are interrelated.
And I'm back, had
The
everything back here
exception here is
recorded,
Christianity,
and I'm wondering why I ain't
way that
hearing
it
nothing.
wishes to
I come back and look at the TV,
personify
damn
and
TV get black. I'm talking
anthropomorphize
about
the God.
Scream Terminator.
So
I said, what the hell?
there's the three. And this would stand for the intellect, the will, and the word. You know, in the beginning there was the word. And the word in this context is what they refer to as the logos, which if you want to look into that, that has a tremendous history to that term. So from this, Christos created the great luminaries. So they're like the ions, but they are pervading other realms. So they take on names that you would kind of, that sound reminiscent of Judaism.
Yeah, go
and
there,
sound
check it. You look at my channel page. It look real nice.
A regular angel name. So there's Harmozel, Oriel, Dayuthe, and Eleth. So aspects like perfection, peace, wisdom, intelligence, love, ideal form, afterthought, perception, memory, loveliness, truth, and form. So these are the fundamental forms of what would later become embodiments in the universe, but they are not embodied. These are the kind of creations of the values. If we were kind of more of the nerdy types, then you would see something similar in the Silmarillion of J.R.R. Tolkien in creating the cosmos that would later become the Lord of the Rings and so forth. So with these created,
hey, that shit be running hot. That shit be hot.
Led to
that's just how hard I be going.
Distillation, which would be referred to as the celestial atom. So with all these archons or all these kind of creative forms, they thought they created the kind of concrescence, the kind of full form of a being to encapsulate all this. And this was celestial atom. So this is man's true place as the Gnostics believe it to be, within the pleroma. And as we'll come to see, when materiality in the physical cosmos is made, they view this as, quite reasonably as we'll see, as an abomination. This should not be the case. We belong in this pleroma along with these other beatific entities. But we'll move on for now, and then we'll try to bring it back. But the important thing here is that the true place, or the idea of the true place and the true embodiment of man, was already conceived of in the realm of the spirit before the universe was ever created. That's the idea. So in Act 2, the very last eternal or further archon that was created in the other realm was Sophia. And for those of us that know, Sophia means wisdom. So this is the goddess of wisdom.
Let me see what's going on with my food.
And Sophia wished to create as the immortals did. She saw up the ladder and could see how the father-mother aspect could create. And she had what they refer to as an avarice or an envy for this aspect of creation. So she wanted to do so, but in this realm, the only way that you could create is with your opposite, much like we do here, masculine, feminine. And her lover at the time, or her opposite, was unwilling to create. So she went ahead and tried to do a self-conception like that which was done with Christos. And in this, created to what the Gnostics refer to as an abortion. And that is the demiurge, as it's referred to as. I think it's like Aldabaoth. is the name that's used. And it was born deformed and blind. And by blind, it means without gnosis. And again, gnosis is the light. It is the divine spark, or what we can understand as consciousness. And insane, it was insane. And with great shame, she attempted to get rid of this right away. So in her experience of seeing the demiurge, of what she had given birth to.
You heard that name he was just trying to call that Bakathal, the Bakathal. See, I told y'all I've always loved, like from a child, I've always loved science fiction, and I've always been fascinated with werewolves and vampires and stuff like that. And I know more than likely you remember Charmed, the movie. I'm talking about the original Charmed, not this knockoff they ain't been long came out with. I'm talking about Phoebe Piper and them. Phoebe Piper and Prue on TNT, the original Charm. Balthazar was, they used to fight Balthazar and all them, the devils, and even Supernatural. Everybody's watched Supernatural. Supernatural and Charm. You can find all this shit that they're talking about in them two television series. And they were some of the longest running television series.
A series of emotions,
hey,
which
Alexis,
were
how you doing?
along the lines of horror, disturbance, shock.
They were putting all that shit in it. They were putting all that the esoteric stuff in the movies and
this
stuff. The
came
hidden
to
knowledge.
codify the demiurge and would be carried with him into the void. This is the point where material creation was made. So there is what is in the spirit realm to the Gnostics.
I still watch Charm,
and this is when the demiurge enters into the void.
I love you too,
and
boo.
when
I ain't seen you. I ain't seen either one of y'all
moving into the void, it got a final vision of Sophia and the greater pleroma, and managed to steal some of the divine light with it when it was moving into the void. So at this point in Act 2, we have the kind of severance, the artificial severance from the spirit world into what is going to become the material universe of which we now inhabit. And so right away, the scale that I'm giving you, that the Gnostics understand, is already a huge scale in comparison to classic Christianity. But anyhow, so the demiurge is now alone in the void, going insane. And since it's there alone in the void and it knows of its faculty and has the divine light, it believes that it is the God. It believes that it is the only God, that it is the thing.
I wasn't even planning on coming
and
back
so
on
with
tonight.
this, it moves to create in the void, and it creates the 12 great archons, which are the constellations, and they all have their different names and their different personifications. And then it moved to make the next 7 archons, which would be the planets, or the planets as they understood it. And in this, the demiurge becomes drunk with power in trying to simulate the spirit realm in the material plane, and believing that it is the end all be all of all things. And Sophia registers this and goes to the higher eternals and goes to Christos and goes
I'm gonna tell you what got me. I don't know if it was this one or another one of his sessions. Cause see, my name, my birth name, my name is Deanna. That's my name, Deanna. That's what my mother named me. And Lilith is she is like, I have Lilith in my Aries in my birth chart, but Lilith was a god who, and they tried and of course they tried to make she was a goddess, and of course they tried to make her seem like she was with Lilith. If you have Lilith in your chart in one of your signs, they try to, because they call it Black Moon Lilith. Okay, so they ain't got to say no more than that. You already know what that means if it's Black Moon Lilith, okay? But in actuality, all these goddesses and stuff that they really tried to like demonize and say were really bad goddesses and gods well, they were really maleficent. I can't even say it. I can't even talk. Y'all know what I'm trying to say.
To the higher archons and admits what she did and what has happened,
Maleficence.
the creation of the demiurge and what the
Like
demiurge
Angelina
is doing.
Jolie, you remember
And so
that?
they start to
Maleficent.
plot a way to return the divine light that the demiurge has to the pleroma. So this is the end of Act 2. And at this point into Act 3, we'll start to recognize it more, because in Act 3, we're going to start getting to Genesis, the events that we understand
Aries,
as Genesis.
With midhead and all that, and that's like what.
So in Act 3,
your career and your ambition and stuff.
With this kind of arrogant proclamation, the demiurge makes the statement, "For my part, I am a jealous God, and there is no other God apart from me." And for those of you that know scripture of Judaism, this is very familiar.
She don't do something she wants.
And because of this statements, the archons that were created, again, the entities that embody the constellations and the planets, they became suspicious. Because if the demiurge was the only true God, then what would that God be jealous of? And so with this, the higher Eternals in the spirit realm, they took the celestial Adam, as we mentioned, the true embodiment of man.
He did a session on
brought it to the edge of the veil, so that its luminous image.
You wasn't here yesterday, but if he gonna come back, CG, because he was on the channel. He's gonna come back again because he said he had a lovely time. He said I have a wonderful community over here that I'm building. But he said he don't know exactly when, but because he gets paid to do this, to go around and do these lectures and stuff, and plus he's in school, So he said things have picked up for him. He got he has some conferences and everything he got to do, and plus with his school and everything, he said. But he said he want to come back because he said he had a real nice time and it was a good exercise for him. Well, that's the food they're probably coming up, but he said it would be nice if y'all could give me the questions ahead of time so I can give them to him so he can be, kind of have them prepared so he can have some already ready when he come back on. And then, y'all can ask him some here in the live, but he don't know exactly when he going to be ready to do it. But he just want me to make sure I get all the questions ahead of time that, just some of the questions ahead of time so he can have that ready. And he'll let me know when they get time to come on. He said he promised me he'll reach out to me and let me know because he really enjoyed it. Let me get out and get my food because that was them texting me.
He reflected into the waters of space-time. And with this, the demiurge trembled and the foundations of the abyss shook and the archons were dumbfounded. And so thinking quickly, the demiurge in his envy said to create a human. So this is the quote, as we've heard it before. "Come, let us make a human being after the image of God and after our own images, so that the human being's image might serve us as a light. Let us call him Adam, so that we might have his name as a luminous power." So this is kind of like a strange Frankenstein's monster kind of vibe to it, where they're trying to remake something in their own that they have no part in making, which was kind of the fault of Sophia to begin with. So they moved to create this vessel, and the body would not live because they don't, we'll get to that in a moment. The body would not live. So as part of the plan that was cooked up by the higher pleroma, the Barbalo dispatches Christos and the four luminaries to whisper in the ear of the demiurge that he should breathe life into Adam. And so he did. He was fooled into doing so. And this was the divine light of Sophia, and that is the light that gives life, the vita, the vitality, consciousness. And so he gave this light to Adam. And so thus Adam was stronger and beyond the demiurge and all of the archons. And of course, they moved to retaliate quickly. And so they cast Adam into the lowest pit of matter. And the Barbelo moved to dispatch the son of Sophia to reside with him. The son of Sophia, she would be, or the daughter of Sophia, I mean, was Zoe. And this would be come to understand as Eve. So Eve's creation was viewed as completely independent and was actually of the higher, from the higher realm into the material plane. So this is where the Gnostics get the concept of a material prison. They wanted to create a prison for Adam so that he would not usurp their whole order. So a body of matter was created from the dust of the earth, or from clay, if you're taking it again from scripture, which Adam's soul was to be imprisoned in. And the same was done for Eve. Furthermore, the Garden of Eden was, in this context, in the Gnostic context, a place of complacency and unperceptiveness, a place that was made for them to be asleep, as to not awaken the gnosis in Adam, a place of leisure and earthly delight, and so that he would have no clue as to his inner power and how to use it. And so the only rule, and again, we recognize this, the only rule the demiurge gave him was that he should never touch the tree of knowledge, or the tree of gnosis. And then, of course, would understand his godhood and would defeat the demiurge and the host of rulers. And so this is one of the last interventions, is the higher Christos, as was mentioned in the Pleroma, is descended into the Garden of Eden in the form of a serpent. So you can see already how they've managed to flip the story of Christianity completely around. So in this case, the serpent is the good guy and actually is Christos. I don't know, it's an interesting twist, and you can see why mainstream Christianity found this as the greatest heresy. And mind you, if you look up Gnosticism, most of what you're going to find is still to this day, this vehement hatred of Gnosticism. So it was the serpent, and in our discussion last week of the celestial hierarchy, we mentioned that the Sephirim, the highest angels, were serpents. They were fiery serpents. So this again is another way that we can kind of flip the idea of what serpents are in the understanding of religiosity. And so we know that the serpent convinces that they should eat from the fruit of the tree, so that they should know good and evil. And this is their realization of their own power and liberation from material darkness, from the material world. And so, again, moving quickly, the demiurge expels Adam and Eve from the garden and cursed the earth, the woman, and the serpent. So that's why we have a false understanding of the serpent and ourselves, is because of the demiurge's curse that was made at this time of splitting from the Garden of Eden. And that the two humans were given the waters of forgetfulness. So again, this is straight out of the afterlife, or the pre-life that is understood by the Greeks, that they would drink from the waters of Lethe to forget. So they were given the waters of forgetfulness, and so that they wouldn't remember who they were, and that they wouldn't, and that they would kind of be brainwashed into this aspect of the man was set to dominate the woman. And in this, they were blinded by their own sins and to the existence of the greater God, the parents, the father-mother aspect in the pleroma, and they would be only convinced of what is here with them, and that would be the demiurge and the archons. So a kind of side note here is one of the archons, all these names are really hard. So one of the archons made by the demiurge, Sabaoth, eventually repented and condemned the ways of his father, the demiurge, and sang praises to Sophia so that he could be lifted into the nearest place to the pleroma. And so in this, Sabaoth became the god of the Jews. So in this way, the way the Gnostics look at the Old Testament, there was both the God that was referred to, the God that is like Yahweh, which is the demiurge, and then there was Sabaoth, and they were both intervening. So where the demiurge appears in the Old Testament is all of the acts of punishment and hatred, and Sabaoth would have been the kind of redeeming God of the Old Testament. So this explains the kind of contradiction in the mythos of the Old Testament. So one was not as arrogant, and one was completely arrogant. So the one that wished to ensue the deluge was the demiurge, and the one who warned and allowed them to prepare for the deluge was Sabaoth. And so you can see that they're acting against each other in this way. So this is where it's come to that humanity had its beginning, and as a lost people unaware of its divine origins. Again, the origin is in the pleroma. And so we have awakened onto the earth at this point, unaware of where we are, of who we are, and where we come from. And that's something that is very real to us, right? Like, you know, most of the time people walk around and everyone's just going about their duties. But if you ask anybody where we come from, you know, then we can get this kind of scientism aspect where, you know, say that we come from monkeys and then we came from fish, but there's just this kind of missing aspect to this. And this is the explanation of the Gnostics, is that we do know, but we've been made to forget. So in this way, the Gnostics view the whole story as us trying to return the stolen light of Sophia to its rightful home in the pleroma. And again, the light is our consciousness, is our ability to care, to be understood, to supersede the material, the mind over matter, that kind of power within us. However, we have been imprisoned by these archons and by the demiurge to physical incarnation, the prison of physical incarnation. So again, this sounds like the Greeks in their concept of the grieving cycle, and this also sounds like samsara, which is, you know, the Buddhist understanding of this, and that this cycle will continue forever until the soul awakens and escapes what they call the wheels of fate. So same story, different twist. And in this last section of the third act, the demiurge is actually banished by Sophia and Zoe, that her daughter, to Tartarus, which is another interesting twist, because Tartarus was the underworld in the Greek conception, but then in the Christian understanding, this would be referred to as Satan, and into hell, where the population was a world of demons, of envy, and death. So you can see, like what I've said from the beginning, that this is an interesting mishmash of all of these things put together. And by the Gnostic interpretation, when you were to see Lucifer, that would actually be the aspect of Christos, because that would be, Lucifer would be the light bearer or the light bringer, and that would be the Christos. Whereas actual Satan would be the God of the Old Testament later. And since we don't see Satan as much until really later in the canonical Bible, that this is the point where the demiurge is made into Satan and rules over hell. And Act 4, I'm not really going to get into, because I realize that I'm spending most of my time here on the cosmogony of everything. Act 4 is essentially the story of Jesus's return and what that was all about. And so this is where I get back to what I mentioned in the beginning of the text that was found, the Gospel of Judas. As the Gnostics understand it, the passions and the crucifixion of Jesus on earth was intended to separate the pure from within him and to destroy the impure. So again, they view all of material as evil, being that it was created by the demiurge. And Christos descended into the material plane and became embodied. So the act of dying was to separate the material evil from his pure beinghood, to remember. And so Judas, in truly knowing who he was, again, is the hero of this tale, allowing himself to be martyred and to be viewed as the betrayer in order to bring Jesus to that pure form that needed to happen. That was a part of the divine plan from the Pleroma. So that's the Act 4. And this leaves the Gnostic story with it as they were practicing, in the centuries past, in early AD. The story was that we would continue to slowly bring the light through Gnosticism, through Gnosis, through understanding, through enlightenment, back to the Pleroma through time. And essentially, we would eventually return all of the divine light that was stolen from Sophia by the demiurge to the Pleroma. And that would leave the void in the void, and it would basically be nothingness. And we would be returned to our rightful place in the Pleroma. And to kind of dive into this a little bit more philosophically, this is a way of explaining this feeling in humanity of something never quite being right, of something never completely being full, of us always striving and trying to find something, to never quite have a true home. And this, to the Gnostics, would be because this is not our home, and that we should do everything that we can to escape it. So they disagreed in many ways as to how this was done. They wished to become completely celibate, as to not create any more life, as this way it would not spread the light even further. And then they disagreed so much with that too. So, either they be completely celibate, or they viewed any acts that could lead to conception as a sin. Or there was the opposite camp. So the first camp was like the Cathars. The Cathars were ones that didn't practice anything like that. And then there's the opposite camp to say that we are the celestial atom, and that we are greater than the material worlds. So thus we can do whatever we please, and that we will take over this place by the very quality of our character through time. So there's a lot of disagreements as to how do we go from here? How do we return the light? How do we return to the home? Now, before I kind of dissect that a little bit more, I want to just mention that, this might seem very strange to us. This might seem like it's very unrecognizable to the mainstream culture, but you see it. Well, for one, there's plenty of churches that exist now of Gnosticism. There's the Ecclesia Gnostica. There's the Johannite Church. There's the Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica. There's the Gnostic Church of France and the North American College of Gnostic Bishops. And then you have all sorts of writers that have kind of made this resurgence. And Madame Blavatsky, of course, is a big one. And so is J.R.S. Mead. But they're the ones that are associated with this theosophical movement, which has also been closely tied to Gnosticism. And of course, I'll probably have to touch on the Theosophists at some point. The other big one was Carl Jung, and he kind of gets a lot of that credit in kind of reviving certain concepts of Gnosticism. Now, it's an interesting thing to think of how any of them really knew, because of like I said before, the library that we discovered, the Nag Hammadi, came out in 1945, and the Gospel of Judas came out later. And so, or resurfaced later, I should say. So for Madame Blavatsky and Carl Jung to be familiar with this stuff seemed like it would have only passed through sort of secret school type of knowledge, through spoken traditions that have lasted since the BCs. We also see it, aspects of Gnosticism used in all sorts of storytelling. So in books, it's like the Valis trilogy, or Valis trilogy, the Blood Meridian, A Little World Made Cunningly, or in films and video games. So there's like the Xenoblade Chronicles, there's Xenogears, the Xenosaga, and the big one that people recognize is The Matrix. And The Matrix was really inspired based off of this Gnostic literature, the idea of the human mind being encapsulated in a sort of simulation and being in reality exploited for some aspect of its existence. And the great ones that really hammer this home, which I just got done watching this, is Neo Genesis Evangelion and Ghost in the Shell, which are more of the anime end of things. So in this case, it's not something that's utterly foreign. We actually see it in some of the literature, but that doesn't mean that we acknowledge it. So neo-Gnosticism, as it stands nowadays, is mostly interested in this interpretation of the matrix, or the simulation theory. This has become more popular, especially among like quantum physicists and so forth, or those that are really into computers. And the idea that it's all a sort of simulation, and the kind of dissolving of our priorities in this life accordingly, that we are trapped in some sort of cube, and that there's seemingly no way of escaping it. Now, I feel like personally, a big reason why Gnosticism has really been brought back, neo-Gnosticism, why it's been a topic in counterculture, is because of these feelings that we have in the modern day of existentialism and nihilism and abandonment and alienation from the material world. And so we tend to be more like defeatist Gnostics, whereas the true Gnostics in the olden times would have done, they wouldn't have just felt like they are trapped. They would have been doing things in this world to, through discipline and asceticism, would be aspiring to escape the wheel. They would have some sort of hope tied to that despair. But in its understanding of, neo-Gnosticism, it's just this despair. And I feel like the reason it's become that kind of hot topic is because of this religion, so to speak, the spiritual belief that makes our despair and makes our feelings of abandonment rational into a religious context. And for those that have taken neo-Gnosticism even further, they wish to say that the archons of the demiurge are actually extraterrestrials, that they're aliens. And so the Greys and the reptilian shapeshifters were apparently described by these texts, making them seem like the embodiments of the archons. And so in that way, we have, and just in this conception, these extraterrestrial entities of higher technological capabilities actively engaging in our world, trying to keep the human psyche at a lower vibration, and trying to feed off of the fear and the nihilism and the darkness of everything. So this, where does this leave us? So there's a few interesting points to take from this. One, we can understand why Christianity was so appalled by Gnosticism. For one, the Cathars were the sorts that would not eat meat. They would not kill anything. They would not be harmful to anything. And if we, remember what mainstream Christianity became, it was very interested in murder and general cheating in order to gain power. So this, the Gnostics of the Cathars would have been this type of like, you're too much of a goody-goody, to have around. And the fact that they believed that the God of the Old Testament was this demiurge was just a kick to the pants, and that the serpent was, Christos. That's clearly blasphemy. And it's that kind of thing that human beings have always had, that we hate our neighbors more than we hate anybody else. And me coming from Minnesota, I always think of the Green Bay Packers and the Vikings. It's just like this thing where you can't hate that one that's that far away, because what you hate are the minute differences. So the reason why Gnosticism really got swept under the rug and why there was a sort of genocide that went down was for this reason, that they were a direct challenge to the power that the establishment of the church wanted to make. Now, the other thing that we should be mindful of is the state of early Christianity was a truly anarchic phase, that this was not, it was not all decided from the beginning. What books would go in and what books wouldn't go in was a very organic debate that continued through time, and eventually codified into what we understand it is now. But in this early phase, there was a lot of different understandings of the alleged experience of Christ on earth, of the experience of the crucifixion and so forth. What do we think about this? How do we rationalize this? What things did John and these apostles actually say? And in these texts, like I said, a lot of this, all the Acts and the Gnostic cosmology I'm giving you was allegedly written by John, the Apocryphon of John. So the Gnostics would be the ones to say that you have hidden crucial evidence, that you have taken out crucial texts to actually understand this. And so the Gnostics would be convinced that the Christians, as we call them, are of the greatest heresy for flipping the truth on its head in this way, and of not discussing the greater fabric of the universe. And so another interesting observation here too is that in this conception by the Gnostics, there is the God of like Judaism, the one that we should not speak of, that there is no true name for, because it is the totality of allness, and that is the God. Whereas we also have other aspects of these higher archons, and the demiurgus archons that embody what could be understood as the Greek pantheon. So it's also giving room for aspects of astrology controlling people's lives, because that's what the archons do. They control the wheels of fate. And so it's not shoving any other scriptures to the side when the Gnostics are creating this greater story. It's actually being all-inclusive. And so this would have stood, well, for one, this is extra fascinating, right? Like to say that they sent the demiurge to Tartarus being a Greek thing is just that kind of interesting tidbit alone. But it's just also to say that that's what made it an even greater threat to the church, was because of this inclusiveness. Now, a lot of the reason why there wasn't a lot of fight back is because, like I said, the Gnostics did not believe in reproducing a lot of the time. And even though if they did practice sexually, the only way that they would continue was through recruitment. Whereas, as we all know, Christians are very able to reproduce, provided that it's under the right conditions, of course. But this would have put them at a disadvantage when it comes to power plays, when it comes to that kind of battleground that was the forming of different religions in Europe. Another last note that I want to touch on again is that the fascination and the resurgence of Gnosticism in the modern day, I find, is very interesting. It's affecting many different religions in different kinds of ways. And I feel like just the fact that we're even speaking the name of it alone shows how much more, in my mind, how much more aware the world is now than it would have been, say, 100 years ago. There are beliefs that are resurfacing from literally being buried in our modern day. And I think that we ought to be grateful for that, because it shows that we're kind of really bathing in the very complex truth of history, that it's not as simple as we thought it was, that there's a lot more to the story than we could have imagined. Now, when it comes to if we were to actually believe in Gnosticism, if we were to kind of buy into it more, then it would essentially put us on the same path as taking Buddhism very seriously would. That is to generally not reproduce, that is to generally be an ascetic, and to practice self-discipline and to practice meditation and all aspects of being healthy and mindfulness, and do your damnedest to escape the wheel and join the true fulfillment of where we originate from. And I feel like when you put it in those terms, it really doesn't seem that foreign to say that if any of us were to believe in the spirit, or the greatest part of ourself, the archetypal self, or the self with the capital S, the self that watches us do all the things and isn't the one doing all the things, that this is the part of us that we know would be most capable of actually being fulfilled. And in this idea, it's just to say that there is a place for that self. There is somewhere to go, but we are, for this time, to be lost here. The other thing that I didn't mention that I think is a good point, especially if anybody wants to look into it a little bit more, is that the Gnostics really put a lot of emphasis on Seth, which is one of the first sons of the Bible, versus Cain. So we would be viewed as different ancestors. And like I mentioned before, there were three types of humans: the humans of the body, the humans of the psyche, and the humans of the spirit. And so these would be viewed as all the different lineages from those first humans. So Cain's would have been the earthly ones, the ones that will not seek to achieve gnosis. I think it's Abel's children who would be the ones that are the psychics, the ones that are capable of achieving gnosis but aren't quite the full push yet. And then the sons of Seth would be the Sethians, and these would be the ones that are the nearest to seeking gnosis or full enlightenment or escaping the grievous wheel. And in this way too, it's interesting for us to look at, because if you are a very conscious person, say you've never really been one to identify a lot with what's been going on in the world, whether that's calling yourself a specific religion, or calling yourself a specific political belief, or labeling yourself in specific ways, because you as a person have always felt very conscientious of everything that's going on and the downfalls of leaning too far to one side or the other, and have been one of this kind of adaptiveness and one of like really always pushing yourself to be the greatest person you can be. This would be what would be viewed as the Gnostics as a Sethian, one who is the most capable of reaching gnosis. And if you're like this, then maybe you're one that really tends towards deeper conversation. And sometimes there are those people that you can have those deeper conversations with if you kind of work with them a little bit. And these would be the psychics. These would be the ones that are near it. They're near it. They're teasing with it. And then sometimes maybe you meet those few people that really hit it home with you and that you can talk with endlessly about these kind of aspects. And these would be other Gnostics or other spirits. Whereas the last one would be those, and you already know where I'm going with this, those that you would be most frustrated with. So those that you think that are purely convinced of the material world. So it's all about sensory pleasure. It's all about whatever I can get. It's all about whoever dies with the most toys wins. It's always about whoever is the king of this absurd nihilistic world type of mentality. The ones that are only convinced of this and that have no interest in spiritual faculties. The Gnostics would discern them as the sons of Cain. So in that way, or the earthly ones, in that way, Gnosticism is also giving an explanation as to this feeling of different types of people being on the same earth, of different lineages of people, and only and different ways of distinguishing ourselves. And mind you, it's not taking that kind of classic Christian approach where it says those that were born from Cain are eternally doomed. It just says that they will be the last ones to go. So it's not this kind of recognized hatred that we might be used to seeing in that kind of classic Christianity, or that domineering Christianity. It's just to say that in returning the light to the pleroma, or in returning to our home, to put it most succinctly, the Gnostics will be the first ones to go, the psychics will be the second, and the sons of Cain would be the last. So with that, I've already taken up basically an hour. We're not going to stick with Christianity any further yet. Doing the celestial hierarchy and Gnosticism has really been a kind of a real dance around the mysticism of Christianity. And eventually we'll come back to it some more with discussions of hermetics, and probably some more discussion of the more deep knit aspect. Welcome to session. Welcome to Spiritual Studies session 43. This session is going to give a focus onto the many concepts seen and all about the Aboriginals of Australia. This session is going to give a broad stroke as to their historical context, their cosmogony, their philosophy, their concept of the afterlife, a few deities, and some cultural motifs. Now, welcome to session 13 of the Spiritual Studies course. This is on all topics related to the snake, the serpent, the dragon. This is a very humbling topic. Right away, I want to say that there are many interpretations that I'm going to give during this talk that you can completely flip on their head in many different ways. This talk is more about giving all the puzzle pieces for others to put together in their own ways. I'm not hoping to give a conclusive statement on what this all means. I am just aiming to provide the information. This talk also could very easily continue onto a whole nother part 2. But in this alone, we're going to establish really how beliefs function all across the world in regards to the serpents, how they're all connected, and what tropes we can find, and how it hints towards a past that we don't know about. And you'll see what I mean as we go on. But I want to start with just talking about the snake totem, or the beliefs of what it means if you encounter a snake in your dreams, or if it presents itself to you in a way that seems significant. Totems are most often attributed to the natives, power animals, spirit animals. So in this, the snake represents a few things. It represents minimalism. So the snake has no limbs, right? It is very simple in its structure. What do you not need? What really is important is a question we could ask from this minimalism. There's also an efficiency and a focus. Snakes don't tend to dilly-dally. They are very directed. And also this aspect of shedding the skin, which we'll talk about plenty. What needs to be let go? What needs to be lost to you? How to move forward in a new version of yourself. Also, if obstacles seem like they're far too big, the snake represents something that can take on something much bigger than itself. So it's this kind of empowering. And in the anatomical sense, the snake unhinges its jaws, right, and consumes something that's much bigger than itself. So in this way, it's kind of got this David and Goliath motif to it. And humility as well. Belly to the ground, head in the dust. That could be another lesson that the snake brings. And one that I think is the most kind of wholesome is, being that the snake is cold-blooded, it will bask, it will lay itself in the light. So if it grows cold, it will hold itself in the light. What brings you this goodness? Where and what can you do to reinvigorate yourself simply? So that gives a good kind of general vibe here. And I'm going to start off in another way with some contention. So for those, I can't study this topic without it always bleeding back into these claims of Atlantis. And I'm not accrediting or discrediting these claims, but the idea is that the serpent was the religious symbol or the symbol of God to the Atlanteans, and the Atlanteans would subsequently inspire many other cultures, including most notably Egypt. And interestingly enough, the ancient Irish claim that their great teachers came from not the East, like history would say, but from the West, off the coast, and that sages came to them and passed down knowledge, and thus the Druids. And the Druids would inherit two notable symbols for us to consider. One is the Zirskibish, or Zirskib, which is the predecessor to the what is later made into the Nazi symbol, which I mentioned in the Mithras talk. They also inherited the symbol of the Orphic egg, which is not known by just them. This egg, this Orphic egg, is frequently depicted with a serpent around it. One interpretation is that this symbol is a representation of the ancient people knowing of the Earth's magnetic field, that the egg is the world and the snake is the auric movements of the magnetic field around the Earth. However, if we try to interpret the Orphic egg in the Greek myth, the Orphic egg is a representation of this character Phanes, Phanes, the golden-winged primordial being who was hatched from the shining cosmic egg. This cosmic egg was the source of the universe, the thing that came out of chaos. This is called the protogonos, or the firstborn. Phanes means to bring light, to shine. And this name would subsequently also mean, in Latin, Lucifer. So the early form was Phanes, and then as it was brought over to Rome, Lucifer. So this is pre-Christianity, mind you, the name Lucifer. And with this now considered, the serpent is meaning power, energy, pure light, something heavenly. So we're going to jump out of Western thinking here for quite a while. And we're going to cover the world. And the first one I want to talk about, and I find this one very interesting, is the vision serpent of the Mayan. The vision serpent, and serpents in general, were a very important religious, social symbol, revered. The serpent is a vehicle by which celestial bodies reach the earth, okay? So the sun, the stars, the vision serpent is the means of all of these beings out there to reach the earth. So in this way, the serpent could be interpreted as rays, light rays. So we might be thinking that the serpent is this literal serpent, whereas it could just be an abstract understanding of what now would be considered scientific. In addition, this vision serpent had this representation of a symbol of rebirth and renewal, again with the shedding of the skin. So this was so important to the Mesoamericans that one of their infamous ancient religious sites, Quetzalcoatl, I think I'm going to say a lot of these names wrong, so I'm apologizing now for what I've done and what I will do. Quetzalcoatl literally means beautiful serpent. The Quetzali means beautiful, and the Coatl means snake. The vision serpent as well is sometimes depicted with, or it's most of the time depicted with a round snout, and it also is having two heads with the spirit of a god or ancestor emerging from its jaws. So when we see these ancient astronaut depictions of gods existing inside of these flying objects which look like snakes, this is a reference to the vision serpent. And so if we want to take this literally, then extraterrestrials are using the vision serpent or the ship that looks like a snake to enter the earth, or we can think of it again in the more abstract ways in the rays. And see this, you can already tell how messy this whole discussion is. So in a big stereotype of the Mayan culture were these bloodletting rituals. And the idea is that through this ritual of bloodletting and bleeding and bleeding and bleeding, one could gain visions that took the form of a giant serpent, which served as a gateway for them to the spiritual realm. They also understood the serpent to be the guardian of the tree of knowledge. So yeah. Dissect that as much as you want. The method of the method in which the ancestors or gods manifested themselves to the Mayan people was by the direct link of the vision serpent. So they would not have knowledge of the spiritual world if it was not for the work of the vision serpent. The idea within this mythos is in the center of the earth, or the center axis atop the world tree. Well, Essentially, the world tree and the vision serpent are located within the earth itself. So technically the underground, in the very center. This is a theme that we're going to see throughout. So if this sounds confusing now, I'm just planting a seed. The last thing I want to mention is that this worshiping or veneration of the serpent continues to the modern natives of the area, in which case they have, if they're being initiated into being a shaman, one completes their initiation by coming into direct contact with a giant serpent, or what they call ochkan. So this lives on to today. This isn't just something dug up from the past. Similarly, but also differently, we go all the way over to the Aboriginals in Australia. And as I've talked about them before, they do believe many different things. So whenever I'm mentioning the Aboriginals, we're trying to get more general statements. So this is about the rainbow serpent, as they call it. The rainbow serpent comes from beneath the ground and creates huge ridges, gorges, mountains. The rainbow serpent controls water in every kind of way. And it also is considered the ultimate creator of everything in the universe. And in the differences, to talk about the differences, some of these, some people, some culture believe that the rainbow serpent is female. Some believe it's male. Some believe that it's hermaphroditic or bisexual. And it's all just to say that we can consider this an androgynous entity. But we do see a lot of variation in whether cultures believe it's female or if it's male. Some commentators speculate that this rainbow serpent is essentially a phallic symbol, which is how they rationalize the fact that the rainbow serpent is a big part of fertility myths and general ceremonies. As we'll see later, the connection between the snake and fertility gods seems to be rooted in the umbilical cord, being the very shape of the umbilical cord. So references to snakes in the ancient world could be a simple reference to an umbilical cord, another way to interpret. So without the vision serpent, getting behind myself, without the rainbow serpent, there would be no rain, and thus there would be no life. The earth would just dry up. So the serpent is very important. Likewise, in other beliefs, they believe that the serpent stops the rain, so to stop flooding. So either way, it is viewed as beneficial. An interesting note here is that this rainbow serpent is also identified with what is referred to as a prismatic halo around the moon, which is regarded as a divination of rain to come. The prismatic ring around the moon is what is referred to as a moon dog. And so calling it the rainbow serpent is a weird reference to this moon dog, perhaps, and also the fact of Ouroboros, which we'll discuss later, the snake eating its own tail and being a representation of a circle, and that's what the moon dog is. It's a circle. The serpent is also associated with human blood, really all blood, so circulation, menstrual cycles, and also is considered a healer. So in this way, our veins are representations of the serpent. Lightning, thunder, storms stem from when this rainbow serpent is angry. There is an association with quartz crystals and seashells. The quartz crystals interpretation might be because of its prism-like appearance. Some people try to dissect these beliefs by saying the fact that this serpent is rainbow is an allegory for the seasons. Blue for winter, red for summer, orange for autumn, yellow for spring.
Okay, Lord.
Um,
Thank you.
this is all particularly interesting because the Australians are inhabiting the eastern part of the world, right? And when we're speaking of dragons, which are synonymous with serpents, which is also why this is a very messy subject, dragons in the East are considered benign, if not beneficial, as opposed to in the West, where they're generally regarded as evil. Now they're regarded as evil and something to be rid of, breathing fire and so forth. But in the East, they believe that the dragons bring rain. So there is this common culture between the rainbow serpent and the dragons of the East in China and so forth. Interesting side note there. So we're gonna jump over again, and I'm gonna talk about a specific what is called the snake cult. It's outside of the reach of common history, but there was a kingdom of Africa from the 1600s until the French defeated in 1904, which is called Dahomey, Dahomey. And the chief was always associated with serpents. The central worship of the people was around.
Now down here in Georgia, up in them old mountains up there, on between with the Blue Ridge Mountains here in Georgia, up on the other side of Atlanta, up around Augusta and all that, and up in the showing up hills, them damn white folks used to be they used to snake worship up there. They used to call themselves kind of like holiness people, and they be up there. They would actually worship snakes. They sure did, and they still do it to today.
Serpents. So we don't know exactly how far back this belief goes. It's just an interesting side note to consider as we're moving along here. Every python, every snake had to be treated with respect, and even if somebody killed one by accident, they were put to death.
Whoa.
The priests that would like care for and home all of these snakes had numerous wives, and they carried snakes around in a hammock, perhaps as a ceremony to expel evil. Now, one of the gods of this mythos is Ashanti, which is a rainbow god. And this god is believed to have the form of a snake. They believe that the snake spirit could manifest itself into any winding objects, such as nerves, such as veins, such as plant roots, or the umbilical cord. Thus, why they associated it with fertility and life. And while I'm mentioning that, the fertility subject, we also have to talk about the fact of the phallus interpretation, the male anatomy taking the shape of a snake. Okay, moving on. Another one that escapes the common dialogue of history is the Basque culture, B-A-S-Q-U-E. They were inhabiting mostly Spain and Western France pre-Christianity. They believed in their mythology, they believed in what they called the sugar. So S-U-G-A-A-R. Almost sugar, could be spelled like sugar, could be Mayu, or could be Sigio, or could be Sorora. But Sugar is the common name that we'll take here. They believe that it was the male half of a deity associated with storms and thunder. Mind you, this is all the way over in Spain, so we're seeing all these connections here. Normally imagined as a dragon or a serpent. An interesting note here is Sugar to the local language is su, which means fire.
And you know what? Before I ever heard this lecture, this session, because I told you I've always been different, even though I'm a preacher's dog kid. I've always knew something was different with that Bible. I've always interpreted the snake as being the symbolism of a penis. That was always my interpretation. Because they said that he tempted her, that was just for some reason I had that was just the interpretation that evolved in my mind. I don't know why.
And gar, which is a flame. So here we see the fire serpent, and we're going to see this trope a lot. So fire serpent, right away we can interpret that as immediately allegorical to dragon, right? It breathes fire. This is an interpretation, the fire is an interpretation of life. So jumping over again is into Macedonia, Glyson, or Glyson. This is again, pre-Christian snake cult-like religious structure, where the belief is, the Macedonians, the belief is that snakes have magical powers related to fertility, such as, for example, the story of Olympia's impregnation by Zeus as he was disguised by a serpent. This is all taking place, by the way, around the years of 20 BC, and so this is all around this time period. And you see many references both in Turkey and in Macedonia, which would become Greece, in all sorts of records that speak of Glyson, which is, again, this kind of deity. One of the quotes is, "Glyson, protect us from the plague cloud." So it's something beneficial. That's something to note here. It's something that is protecting, something that is venerated. It is good, okay? This is so involved in the culture of that area that Marcus Aurelius, a very popular name, would seek prophecies from the snake god, from Alexander and his snake god. So now that I'm in this area, I have to talk about one of the big hitters of this subject, which is the rod of Asclepius. Everybody has seen this, even if you don't know that you've seen this. Asclepius was a healer, and we're talking Greece here, okay? In his healing area, snakes were allowed to crawl freely upon the floor. So you have a bunch of sick and injured people and snakes all around. That's quite the interesting scene, right? And from 300 BC onwards, the cult of Asclepius would become a big phenomena, and people would come from all over to be cured by Asclepius. So something about the snakes and these healing powers. So, and as a side note too, in some of these healing places of Asclepius, they would also have dogs lick wounds. So it's not just about snakes here. But I want to break this down as I'm on this subject right now. The snake, in regards to healing, is the understanding of the use of venom as medicinal. So as with many things that are pharmacological, it depends on your dose. Some things that would be healing in very small doses would be extremely toxic in its regular dose. So this could be a possible interpretation for how Asclepius was healing people by use of snakes. So this is where we get the serpent and the staff appearance. You have the staff and you have the serpent coiling itself around it. This is a development of this Asclepian cult. So the shedding of the skin and renewal, rejuvenation, all of these things speak to healing. It might also, this symbol of the rod of Asclepius might be speaking to the dual nature of death and life, and sickness and health. So it also could be speaking to the mysterious nature of the use of drugs to begin with. So I mentioned pharmaceuticals. This word comes from pharmakon, which is meant drug, but this word also meant medicine, and it also meant poison. So it was understood that all these things go together. And I realized that we have, a lot of potential here to speak of the kind of shady business of modern pharmaceuticals, but that's not important. What is important, though, is that the snakes were viewed as pharmacological and had medicinal properties. So that in this way, you could be prescribed to be injected with snake venom. So you see this used by medical industries all over the world. When you see an ambulance, you will see the rod of Asclepius. That's what this is. And this is one way that we can interpret why they use that symbol. A side note here is that another one, another symbol that doesn't get used as much, but still does get used, is the bowl of Hygeia. And the bowl of Hygeia is a reference to the god Hygeia, which the god Hygeia is literally where we get the word hygiene. It means health. It was the wife or daughter of Asclepius, depending on what books you're reading. That's an interesting side note there. Another thing that's used by corporate healthcare industries. There's also a weird connection that we have to establish right away here with Christianity in the Book of Numbers, or more accurately, the Old Testament and Jewish texts, where in the Book of Numbers there is what is referred to as the Nehushtan. God, I hope I'm saying that right. And this is a reference in the Bible that God called upon Moses to create a brass serpent on a pole, as saying that anyone who was bitten by the snake in the desert would live if they looked at it. This is going to become interesting later, because in this way a snake is healing these people. But earlier in the Old Testament we have the case where the snake is ultimate evil. So that's just the beginning contradiction that we can get out of the way right away. But there is this comparison between the rod of Asclepius and this story in the Bible. Also, I want to mention that the use of the term fiery serpents can be found throughout the Bible here, and in regards to this rod or staff that Moses used. One way that we can interpret this aspect of fiery to make it very mundane is that the sensation of being bit by venom could feel as if you are on fire. That's one way of making this mundane. However, when speaking of the rod, I have to also mention something that has been fundamentally misunderstood by everybody, and also likely myself, and that is the caduceus. And the caduceus has been inaccurately used by healthcare industries. What they should be using is the rod of Asclepius, but the caduceus is the pole with the two snakes wrapping around and intertwining themselves. We see the caduceus all the way back in Sumeria with this god, let me try to say this properly, Ningishzida, Ningishzida. Again, this is where we see the symbol. This is all the way back to 4000 BC. This god, Ningishzida, is the lord of the good tree. So he's associated with serpents, and he's associated with trees. Surprising. This would get brought all the way to Rome, and we would see in depictions of Mercury that in his left hand, he's holding the caduceus. And being the messenger of gods and the guide of the dead, this was his sort of tool, the caduceus. So many different ways that we can interpret it from that. As I mentioned last week in the Hindu talk as well, Mercury is the fiery planet. It's the one closest to the sun. So in this way, we can interpret this as the fiery end of the fiery serpent, or bringing the sacred knowledge to humanity and to the other gods. This symbol, the caduceus, would move from Rome into astrology, into astronomy, and into alchemy. So then we would see its meaning go even more broad. It would denote a planet, and it would denote the element Mercury as well. It is said that the wand held in Mercury's hands, or left hand, would wake the sleeping or send the awake to sleep. And if applied to the dying, their death would be gentle and nice. And if applied to the dead, they would return to life. I have to say as well that the caduceus, although inaccurately used by the healthcare industries, is more often used by armed forces. You can see it in armed forces and militaries all around the world, that somewhere in their, their badges, their flags, their symbols, you see the caduceus, interestingly enough. And I have to mention that the caduceus has an uncanny resemblance to DNA. So this is a way that we can get very deep into how much was truly understood by the past. How much did they really know about? And in this way, again, that the snake isn't actually a snake, but it's a form that takes the liking of a snake. To witness DNA could be to say that those exterior strands take the shape of a snake. It's that simple, just like the rays of the sun. So now I have to talk about Egypt. So as everybody knows, the pharaohs would have their head garments and a snake popping out where their third eye would be, right above their nose. And the Egyptians, again rumored to be the ancestors of the Atlanteans that couldn't return home, worshipped snakes, especially the cobra. And the snake was associated with many gods, one of which was Wadjet, another is Ra, it's a big name. They were viewed to be possibly evil in the case of where the snake was appropriated by Set or Apep. But Wadjet would become a kind of patron goddess to Upper Egypt and would popularize this use of the cobra. She became one of the protective elements of the pharaoh's crown. So this is where we start to see that introduction of the snake to the crown. She was said to spit fire at the pharaoh's enemies and all enemies of Ra. So this was also, we could say it was a spiritual thing in regards to the third eye, an interpretation of the Kundalini in India, which we'll get to. Or we could say that it's simply a protective emblem, or we could say it's both. Now, where we get the evil side of the snake here is from Apophis, which Apophis is a pre-cosmogenic entity. So this is a, well, let me just get into it. Apophis is a giant serpent that lives in the dark waters of undifferentiated chaos before the creation, or before what they called the Ben. Apophis was angered by creation because of its duality and order. In what was before, everything was a unified whole. But after creation happened, everything became opposites, light and dark, male and female. So to say that it came from undifferentiated chaos makes it seem negative. Also, when it says dark waters, we have to understand that in the ancient world, they're not talking about the sea, they're talking about space. Space was viewed as an ocean, a cosmic ocean. So the dark waters were space. This is a big story. It's not just taking place here on Earth. So Apophis, this tremendous snake serpent, would become the enemy of Ra, the sun god. And if Apophis could swallow Ra, he could return to everything would return to the unified whole, or of the eternal darkness, as is negatively connotated. And so there's this great story that happens throughout Egypt of this battle between Apophis and Ra, where they would tie Apophis up, cut him to pieces, him, her, I'm not sure, and he would return over and over and over again, no matter what they would do, to attack the sun god's boat. And that's the other thing, is that, Ra was thought to be riding a boat through the cosmic ocean, and that the sun is a boat riding through the cosmic ocean. Interesting way of recontextualizing the world we live in. So every night and every day, that is the battle that's happening. The night, Apophis is ruling, and in the day, we have Ra, who is overcome. So human beings, and this is an important part, this struggle between good and evil, between Apophis and Ra, or Apophis and Ra, relied heavily on the attention of all the Egyptians. They had to pray, they had to do ceremonies in order for Ra to succeed. So it could be that if they didn't keep doing what they were doing, that the eternal darkness could return, and that Ra would get swallowed by Apophis. So we see this is where it gets flipped. So we have Apophis here, which is our first good example of a very negative entity in regards to snakes. We also see this contrast here where in Egyptian mythology, human beings are important in the grand scheme of the universe. This paradigm will be flipped by Christianity, wherein we are unworthy, we have been tricked, we have made bad decisions, and we are guilty, and we do not have any power over what happens on the celestial scheme. That's all God. So Apophis would survive in Christian mythology and iconography through Leviathan, or in another way, they kind of merged it with Set, and this benign serpent in Egyptian mythology, Sata. And as we can already see, this would derive into Satan, and this is the association of Satan and the serpent, and that twists it into this entity trying to overthrow divine order by the inspiration of Apophis. It wants chaos. It's always working to chaos. It will swallow the sun whole. This is a great introduction to the Chaos Conf story, which I've mentioned before. This is something that you'll find in comparative religion. So in Christianity, you have Leviathan being slain by God. God is slaying the tremendous serpent. In Egyptian, as we just saw, there's Ra and Apophis. And then in Canaanite polytheism, which we mentioned, Lotan is defeated by Baal, the storm god. And then over in Greek mythology, we have Zeus slaying Typhon, Zeus being the storm god. Then we have Marduk back in Mesopotamia and Sumeria, Marduk killing Tiamat and forming the heavens and the earth from her divided body. You see how that's kind of similar to cutting up, Apophis a whole bunch. And then lastly, which is a good segue for me, we see this in Thor struggling against what is referred to as, what I probably will butcher the pronunciation of, Thor struggling against Jormungandr, which is a tremendous monster snake entity. So this is Norse mythology, which is also where we're going to get the introduction of Ouroboros. It's not the beginning of Ouroboros, but they definitely helped popularize Ouroboros. And if you don't know what that is, I'll explain that in a moment. So we see this introduction of this serpent, Jormungandr, which grew large, so large that it would encircle the world and grasp its tail in its teeth. So the snake eating its own tail and forming a circle. Likewise, we have another snake kind of mythos to talk about when it comes to Norse mythology, and that is that this figure of Sigurd, the snake in the eye. And this is a son that is born with the image of a white snake in one eye. This snake encircled the iris and bit itself in the tail. Hard to interpret, but I'm trying to just show the commonality of all these myths. But to give it more credence, it is a trope, a common belief in indigenous people in South America that at the edge of the water of the world, there is a world disk that is encircled by a serpent, an anaconda that is biting its own tail. So in this way, we saw that the earth is formed from the body of Tiamat by Marduk. And then over here, we see the story in Norse mythology, and we see in South America as well, of this concept of the earth being Ouroboros. All of this Leviathan stuff is related to Ouroboros, or the snake eating its own tail. We also see this connected to Vedic beliefs, Indian thought. In a Vedic text, the nature of the Vedic rituals is compared to a snake biting its own tail. Ouroboros symbolism is also used to describe the Kundalini, which I mentioned before. So we have to talk about the Kundalini now for a little bit, which is something I've been hoping to talk about for a while. The Kundalini is described as a divine power that shines like the stem of a young lotus, or like a snake coiled round upon itself. She holds her tail in her mouth and lies resting half asleep at the base of the body. And if we're talking about Hinduism here, then we could also say that Ouroboros, or the snake, is a symbol for the cycle of samsara, birth, rebirth, or death, rebirth, death, rebirth. Kundalini, literally translated, means coiled snake. Kundalini is the act of awakening the coiled snake that lies in the lower portions of your personhood to extend, to become an open conduit, and to electrify you, to experience the all. The Kundalini experience is reported as a distinct feeling of electricity running through your spine, which takes the shape of a snake. And that this Kundalini is a kind of cosmic energy that collects into the base of your spine. And I'm going to explain this a little bit more, so just bear with me. And when this extends, it reaches to your crown chakra, reaches up to your head, and produces an extremely profound transformation of your consciousness. This Kundalini is associated with the divine feminine. We find it more in the traditions of Tantra and Shaktiism. As another side note, Vishnu sleeps on the serpent of eternal time. Interpret that as you will. So in this way, we see here in the East that it represents a number of things. It represents the perpetual cyclical nature of life, the renewal of life. This is what I'm saying. The snake is a reference to our soul, and the footless one is a reference to the fact that the snake does not leave tracks. And in this way, the soul does not leave footprints because it is not physical. So that's why it is likened to the snake in the fact that it doesn't leave tracks. And why we're fearful when we might see a snake is also a strange allegory for the fear of meeting our own soul, which is interesting. And also this aspect of us shedding our body as we do, the soul shedding its body and moving on to a new body, another symbolic reference to the
Very
snake.
interesting.
So how many ways do we want to look at this? The kundalini in this way, the coiled snake at the base of your personhood, is your soul resting in a half sleep. And the exercise of reaching kundalini or teasing it upwards to uncoil itself is to experience your soul. So is all of this, to break down many of the things that we've talked about, is this phallic, right? Are we talking of fertility alone? And are we talking of the creation of life? Are we talking about a destructive force too? Like death is destructive. It being both sides, right? So in this way, the snake being both extremely positive and extremely negative. Also, this aspect of regenerative force, of things being reinvented, renewed, reinvigorated, transformed. Ooh. In India, with Shiva, the serpents also represent releasing that of which is no longer needed. You need to let go, like shedding the skin, which brings us back to the talk of totems all the way at the beginning. This all feeds into each other. Okay. One last side note before I get to some of my closing statements that I want to make. Well, just bear with me. In Mesopotamia, we have mortality stolen by a snake. So, immediately seeming to contradict everything I said. Well, welcome to this talk. So now I have to talk about Christianity. In the preface to this talk, I said, understanding the snake in the Garden of Eden. And the understanding of the snake in Christianity is so convoluted. In my celestial hierarchy talk, I mentioned the Sephirim, which are the angels that are nearest to God, which bear 6 wings and are, a very abstract entity. That translation of seraphim is literally fiery serpents. So this is really confusing. This is a highly angelic being the closest to God. And likewise, this gives us a segue to talk about Lucifer, right? So this is really confusing. This is a highly angelic being the closest to God. And likewise, this gives us a segue to talk about Lucifer, right? Lucifer being the closest to God, the closest angel to God, and being cast down, right? So the fiery serpents, confusing here. And we see the Leviathan, we see the Tannin. It makes this correlation between the dragon and the serpent with Satan and the devil over and over and over again. And that the serpent is supposed to represent the hubristic Satan or Lilith. That it's always used for evil in the Christian canon. And yet again, I'm going to speak to another contradiction, because there is this quote where Jesus is speaking to this character in the Bible, Nicodemus. And he says, here's the scripture, just as those who looked in faith to the serpent in the wilderness were healed, so a reference to the rod of Asclepius, so those who look in faith to the lifted up Son of Man will have eternal life. Highly convoluted stuff here. In theosophy, there's a much different story in regards to the serpents and the story of the wise serpents, and that the wise serpents are actually associated with the tribes of Levi, which brings a whole nother interpretation to this story. And also that the wise serpents were a type of people instead of strictly an animal. So a reference to a kind of tribe, or maybe a reference to the Atlanteans, right? So what I really want to touch on here is that I've mentioned things all around the world. I've neglected a few things. For instance, the fact that the Hopi have a belief that the Indians in the southern United States have a belief in the snake people. I think they're called the Seti, that saved them from the flood, that came from the ground, that came from the underworld. A lot of the things that I didn't mention, there's so much more to unravel, but two sides, right? The snake protected them, healed them, did many beneficial things for them, but was also used as the primordial chaos, a representation of the primordial chaos. And similarly, we see this much more contradictingly in Christianity, where in some ways the snake is beneficial. It heals all those people when it's on Moses' staff. But then we see that it's severely negative in swaying Adam and Eve to bite of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And everything. This association with the serpent and the tree of knowledge is a very interesting one. We could understand this Kabbalistically. We could understand this as an actual phenomena of the inner earth somehow. We could understand this as a purely celestial symbology. But it's to say that on all the levels that we've talked about it, the snake as a mundane animal, in all the lessons that it can show you just by its sheer being, and then also applying that to the Orphic egg, all the way to the severe grandiose scale of the celestial cosmos as a kind of being that, and interpret it in just the way that the Kundalini does, that the snake is the soul. And this could bring some interesting realizations, that it is both very good and very bad. And when I say it's very bad, it's us reacting to its truth negatively. Acknowledge as a modern society that there seems to be a root to this, whether we want to call it Atlantean or not, that has inspired all people from all sides of the world in different ways as they've changed this central myth that they've inherited. Okay.
All right, my loves, that's the end. I hope y'all enjoyed this presentation. That's it for me tonight. I might see y'all tomorrow. I will see y'all tomorrow, but I ain't gonna. I'm trying to take me try to take a little rest because I'm kind of tired. But I had to see, broadcast one of my guys, a couple of his sessions, spiritual studies, because I really respect him. I highly respect him. I appreciate him doing me the favor of coming over here and talking to you guys the other week. And he's going to come back again when he gets some time. So, my loves, I always remember, as above, so below. As within, so without.